Hi, friends. Welcome back to My Nervous System, a podcast about better understanding your nervous system so we can all move through hard times with a little more calm and a lot less self blame. I'm Erin, a mom, a therapist, and creator of the Mind Circuit app. It's called Ease. It's a simple nervous system reset tool, regulation in your pocket, friendly support for your nervous system when it needs it. Today, I'm super excited to welcome back Dr. Jen Dragonette. We are going to continue our conversation on boundaries, the complexity of setting and maintaining boundaries in relationships, and essential tools that can enhance communication, foster trust, and lead to healthier, more fulfilling connections. Let's get started. Thank you again for coming back to My Nervous System. I really do appreciate your time and value it. So thank you. Last time we had talked about boundaries, and then we ran out of time because boundaries is so interesting of a conversation and very much on topic these days. I wanted to do a follow-up episode about what to do when maybe a boundary is not respected or not understood, how to
Mhm.
hold the boundary, the flexibility within the boundary. I just find sometimes people are not understanding that there is room within a boundary to have that conversation back and forth and the value that
Mhm.
that places. So I wanted to hear what's some of your experience with that, and have you been noticing that lately?
Yeah, it's a great series of questions, Erin, and I'm so glad we get to dive in a little deeper because boundaries, for better or for worse, it's really a buzzword these days. I think in many ways it's great because I know when I was little, we didn't talk about boundaries or even have a
No.
concept of boundaries or feel like we were
Mm-mm.
allowed to have them. And like everything, then when we start talking about it more broadly, it can get reduced to more of a binary or kind of reductionist
Yes.
meaning than what I think I intend when I talk about boundaries or what you intend. So, with boundaries, I think we often think of it as keeping people out or keeping experiences out, or, we have to set our boundaries because I'm not safe around you. And it certainly can be that intense or that
Mhm.
extreme. Most of the time, when I'm thinking about healthy boundaries, I'm really trying to think about more semi permeable boundaries that I have a
Mhm.
sense of the kinds of conversations, the kind of interactions, the kind of people, the kind of relationships that I really welcome. And, I can have some flexibility around, is there a situation that's going on here that might shift how I feel? Or is there something happening with me that might change my boundaries on a given day? So, the curiosity around it, I think, is a really healthy place to start. And if we take that idea that we have set a boundary, if we go back and listen to our first conversation and we do all those wonderful things and we practice our
Mhm.
DBT skills and we set a very good, healthy, clear boundary, and then it's not honored or it's not respected by that person,
Mhm.
I think it's really easy, maybe too easy, to just automatically decide then that this isn't a safe person or this isn't a safe relationship. That might be true, and we can talk about how to assess that. But there's often so much else going on that because we as humans are not very good mind readers, we don't know how that boundary landed with that person, what
Mhm.
it might bring up for them. Maybe it interferes with a very important boundary of theirs, or it runs into a value of theirs that we're not aware of. So for me, and when I'm working with people around this, the first thing I want to do is notice the source, which is in general a phrase that I try to remind myself of. Notice who this person is. Typically if we're talking about boundaries, we're talking about something interpersonal. So there's going to be another
Mhm.
person on the other side of them. And if this is a person who I love and trust and typically has my back or understands me or I feel securely attached with, and my boundary isn't feeling right, it's not being honored or they're not
Mhm.
seeming to understand it or I'm getting a lot of pushback, that relationship is really important. And I think approaching it with curiosity rather than as a decision, right? This isn't
Right.
okay. It allows us to do what we probably want other people to do with us, which is have a little bit of generosity, a little bit of compassion. And so
Mhm.
it's much more of a middle path than just saying, well, this is where I am. And if you're not okay with it, we can't have a relationship. Again, if the source is someone that we love and trust.
I think that's really important to bring that up because a lot of times I will have difficulty expressing that to an individual I'm working with. That if the boundary is not understood or not respected, who is the person? What are the conversations? What are the questions? And I will get pushback like, well, then they're not following my boundary. They're not going to hold my boundary. I can't open up room to talk about it because it's a
Hmm.
slippery slope.
Hmm.
And I'm like,
Right.
no, boundaries are for communication.
Right. They really are. And like we talked about in our first conversation, I think in healthy relationship, boundaries are part of how we maintain the health of the relationship. I love you and I trust you enough to
Mhm.
clearly tell you what's comfortable for me, what I can and can't do, to say no when I really mean no, which I might not do with someone who I don't love and trust as much, right? I wouldn't
Mhm.
maybe feel as free or as authentic with that person. So if there's a relationship where we do feel like this person has our best interests at heart, I feel like I have their best interests in my heart,
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with having more conversations. And if we use the word boundary and that person understands it, that's a nice way in of, I'm noticing that I put a boundary out there that I'm wondering if it's uncomfortable for you or if you don't understand it, would it be helpful if I talked a little bit more about why that boundary is there?
Mhm.
And really let that person share with us what are the curiosities that they have. What is this bumping into on their end, so that we can see, is there room to negotiate? I mean, that's
Right.
one of my favorite pieces of that DBT skill, dear man, that we talked about, which we often forget, but that's the end of the man, is negotiate if possible, right? If it's
Mhm.
appropriate, if it feels safe to do so, as a reminder that when we get super rigid, we sometimes lose a whole lot more than we gain. And
Absolutely.
so, if there's a boundary that I set because it was important to me and my friend says, well, I can't really do that, but I can do this, or maybe if I explain where I am, it'll
Mhm.
help you understand. Isn't that the point, right? We're not just setting boundaries to set boundaries. We're setting boundaries to have more healthy, open, honest relationships with people.
Yes. And I think sometimes the point of that gets lost in the word boundary. For whatever
Mhm.
reason, it it comes up in a lot of people's minds as like this rock wall. And I always
Mhm.
try to describe it as a fence you can see through, right?
Right.
It's
Mhm.
giving you a foundation of where the line is, but you can put your hand
Mhm.
through a fence, you can see through a fence, right?
Mhm.
There can be communication that comes through
Yep.
the fence. Um,
Exactly.
for Do you have that disconnect with people you work with where they feel like the boundary means the end all be all and they're just that's what the boundary is and no
Mhm.
communication?
I do see that from time to time, and I often think of it as kind of a pendulum swing where, a
Mhm.
lot of people did not have experiences setting boundaries or having boundaries be respected at all. And so we can swing to the other side, which is sometimes a very important and healthy move, that I'm going to finally take care of myself. I'm going to
Mhm.
finally set some boundaries, figure out what's safe and important to me, and I'm going to hold it, right? And no one's going to budge me on that. And I get that, that is really human and understandable, that, if we've felt like we've been walked all over, or that we didn't
Mm.
have a voice before, or that our experience didn't matter in some way, then I get why we might want to just set these rock hard boundaries and not budge on it. And sometimes we need to. So, I do want to save some space today to talk about the times when those rock hard boundaries are completely appropriate and
Uh-huh.
very indicative of whether we actually do feel safe with someone or can trust them moving forward. For me, when I'm really trying to assess that with somebody, I often will ask, what is your intention with this boundary?
Mm.
Which is a great thing to just like push back and think about in general. What's my intention here? I know we talked about that make sureing dynamic last time, and
Uh-huh.
that's my favorite question for that too. What's my intention with offering this help? Or what is my intention in inviting someone over, which is a boundary, right? Inviting
Uh-huh.
somebody in is also a boundary. And if the intention in, setting a keep out kind of boundary is I want to show up more authentically with this person. And if I don't set this boundary, I am, showing up codependently or I'm showing up in a way that doesn't feel
Uh-huh.
right to me. Then that's probably something that would be really great to talk with them about. And, particularly if there's confusion or some sort of a misstep with that boundary, the intention is actual closeness, actual connection. And so let's expand on that in this boundary and say, okay, my intention was to really want to be there with you at this thing. And if that way that I set that boundary isn't going to get us that, why not readjust it?
Right.
If the intention is, I don't feel safe with you, and I need to set this boundary to protect myself or protect my nervous system.
Uh-huh.
Or if the intention is, I have believed you before and you've never told me the truth. And so I'm setting a boundary here, again, as more of a protection or a way to honor
Mhm.
myself. And that boundary keeps getting pushed and pushed. That might be more one of those times when we want to take that as information, right?
Uh,
That I'm setting a boundary for my own safety, for my own comfort, and it's being disregarded. So it does, I think unfortunately sometimes reinforce the need for that boundary to be so strong with that particular person or in that particular circumstance.
is there certain verbiage that you find helpful for clients to use when they're trying to express a flexible boundary versus a very rigid one that's more about safety for themselves?
Mhm. Do you mean to the person that they're expressing the
Mhm.
boundary to? Yeah. I think it's nice. I personally like using the term boundary, but not everybody wants to use that word, or maybe it's too much of a buzzword. But I think it's nice to really put out the intentionality behind
Mhm.
it. So, what we were just saying about if this boundary that I'm setting, I'll try to think of an example so we're not just kind of talking in the clouds. Um, so and so asked to have me help them move this weekend, right? And I really don't have time or space, nor do I enjoy helping people move. And I would do it if I absolutely had to, but I think it's going to bring up resentments if I say yes when I really mean no. Something
Mm,
like that. Right? Where it's not an unsafe person, they're not touching my body in a way that makes me uncomfortable. It's more that I don't have the time, or this doesn't appeal to me, or I don't really feel like I can
right.
freely offer this thing. Um, then I usually recommend talking about it from that standpoint of my intention in this conversation, right? I so appreciate that you think of me as someone who you reach out to when you need support. I've really thought about this. And I think if I say yes, it's not a wholehearted yes for me. And I'd love to find a different way that I can support you. But as I sit with this, I think that there's a potential for resentment
Mm.
if I agree to this, because it's really not wholehearted, right? It's not really something that I can freely offer to you.
Oh, I love that, but I don't hear many people talk like that. I hear a lot of times people pulling back from
Mhm.
explaining or even acknowledging to themselves that there could be
Mhm.
resentment or that they don't wanna say yes.
Mhm. Yeah. It really does require that first couple of steps, which is so internal, where we can use our body and our nervous system as a really good hack. Like, I'm
Mhm.
having something happening in here, right? Something about this feels icky, or I'm dreading, right? If we're dreading
Mhm.
seeing someone who we really like a whole lot, what's that about? And trying to kind of get underneath it in our own self. Because it's hard to come to someone and say, I don't know why, but I don't really want to do this thing, right?
Yes.
That's a little bit trickier. And so, to your point, what I see more is people kind of withdrawing, pulling back. Maybe we even do the thing that we don't want to do, but we feel less close to that person. And that, to me, is the whole point of setting good, healthy boundaries with people that we love and feel safe with, is to continue to love and feel safe with them, and to continue to feel as close to them as possible. Um, and so I try to, as much as possible, say those things in my own
Mhm.
life. I want to be able to show up for you in a way that feels authentic, or I want to look forward to our time in a way that really feeds both of us. And I
Right.
realized that, previously, and I think it's always great to kind of tell on ourselves, previously I have said yes to some of these things, and I typically end up really wishing that we had done something else together, or,
Mhm.
that I had shared all of my hesitations and concerns rather than pretending I was comfortable with
Mhm.
this thing, in the interest of our relationship, in the interest of our friendship moving forward, or in the interest of, our marriage being honest
Right.
about these things.
Those are difficult conversations to have, but
Mhm.
so important and such an essential part of just the idea of having healthy communication and how
Mhm.
boundaries are a piece of that.
Mhm.
But you hit on that point about the nervous system when it's feeling safe versus
Mhm.
when it's not, and being able to tune into that.
Yeah.
Um, are there certain situations that you feel the nervous system's being louder or softer that we have to f- take a moment to step back and tune into that more? Um,
Mhm.
a lot of people walk around like their heads only.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true, and I think, it's it's a double-edged sword a little bit to tune into our nervous system. It's always there.
Mhm.
That information is always accessible to us and available, and sometimes we really don't wanna see it. We don't really want to recognize that we're deeply uncomfortable in this particular situation, or with this person, or, even harder if it's a family member or someone that we've known for a very long time. So we can stuff our own reactions pretty easily, and just act as though we're comfortable, or act as though we're okay. And sometimes we don't even notice our own nervous system reactions until afterwards. Maybe we feel super depleted after being around somebody, or we find ourselves, experiencing, that sense of dread when we're about to see them, or when their name shows up on our phone or something like that.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of a matter of befriending ourselves, or, I know we talked a lot about parenting last time,
Mhm.
tuning into ourselves and our bodies the way we would tune into a small child. Like, hey, what is that? Right? I just noticed a
Mhm.
shift in there with you. We might do that with a little kid. Oh gosh, you look scared, or what's going on?
Mhm.
And I think if we can bring that curiosity into ourselves, and this too sometimes takes time and practice, and maybe a really good therapist or a good partner to help us
Mhm.
do this and get used to it. But if we can tune in and say, wow, I feel a little nauseous right now, or I feel just kind of lightheaded, or I'm a little spacey, or I feel turmoil, or I feel shaky, right? Just any of those nervous system reactions. Same thing if we get a boundary pushback, if we're willing to have some curiosity around that, like
Mhm.
what might that be about? Is this just because I am excited to see this person and I haven't seen them in a long time? Okay, great. Is this because the last time I saw this person, they said all these passive aggressive things that made me left me feeling really unhappy afterwards or discombobulated? Or, is this because I feel like I'm constantly on my heels because there's a lot of criticism coming my way, or
Right.
I'm expected to defend myself, right? We all have relationships that feel like that. We don't necessarily notice in the moment. So it's always okay to set boundaries or even think about boundaries before, during, or after our interactions with people or in a situation. It feels great to catch it right then and say, "Ooh, I
Mhm.
really didn't like that thing that you just said to me." And I don't know a lot of people, myself included, who can do that all the time perfectly or who even want to all the time, right? That's a lot of work,
It
but we can do it
is.
after, right?
Well, but I think that's also important to highlight that you can always make that change and that
Mhm.
you can go back and say, "Hey, this didn't fit right, didn't sound
Yes.
right. Something came up for me. Can we talk about it? Can we do it
Mhm,
different
mhm.
next time?" The idea that we can always voice that we do need a change, regardless of
Mm.
how many times we've done it. You
Yes,
have the right to say, "I would like something different."
you do. Yes, and it is one of those rights that I wish we talked about more often. We have the right to change our mind.
Oh,
We have the
yes.
right to change a dynamic, right? We have the right to change the way a relationship feels. And some people don't like that, particularly if it's been working really well for them and it hasn't been working well for us. But if these are going to be relationships that are actually egalitarian, bidirectional, meaningful, secure, attached, all of those wonderful
Mhm.
things, I would rather know. If I'm on the receiving end of that kind of a boundary, like, "Hey, Jen, last time we spent time together, I left feeling a little unhappy, or you said this thing
Mhm.
that stuck with me." As much as that hurts, I would so much rather know, because then I can have a real relationship with that person. Over time, if those kinds of things aren't addressed, we either have these relationships that feel really obligatory and not very satisfying, or we just drift apart. And I think that's really such a tragedy. And I do see that in a lot of folks that I work with, where they've just slowly over time lost people in their lives where it might not have been necessary.
Mm.
And again, sometimes we really do need to get distance and separate from people who are dangerous to us. But a lot of the time, it's just a matter of, feeling like we don't want to have a conflict in quotes, because this doesn't have to be a big conflict, but we can work ourselves up as though it's going to be.
Mhm.
Or we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, right? We can get into that space where we feel responsible for other people's emotions and view them as fragile. And if I say I didn't like this, it'll destroy you, right? That's a tough way to have a relationship, and probably not a relationship that feels very good to anybody when we're having it. So, I think if we're brave enough, and it is a courageous thing to do, if we're brave enough to share a boundary with someone who we love and respect and trust, and if they are willing to hear it, if we can appreciate that,
Mm.
that can go so far to reinforce that this isn't a consequence, this isn't a punishment, this isn't you losing me, this isn't me being mad at you.
Mhm.
This is me sharing important information. And I can't remember if I said this last time, but one of my favorite phrases that I try to remind myself of is, "What we appreciate, we get more of."
Mm.
Almost always, right? In romantic relationships, in parenting relationships,
Mhm.
in therapy, in business relationships. If all we're doing is saying, not that, nope, not that either. No, that's wrong. I don't like that. That's a bad boundary, right? All we're telling people is that they're doing something wrong and we don't like it. And what are they supposed to do? But if
Mm.
we can say, "I so appreciated being able to tell you this past weekend that I just wasn't up for getting together. And I so appreciate that you're someone who I don't have to make up a big excuse around, that I can just say, I'm so tired. I need a
Mhm.
night off." And that you heard me. That just made me feel so close to you. We're going to get so much more of that from that person next time. And maybe they're going to feel comfortable coming to us and saying, "You know what? Same. I am so overloaded. I can't do this thing that we agreed to do. And I just need to tell you that, right? So if we can start that cycle of appreciating the respect for the boundaries, or at
Oh,
least the curiosity about being able to talk about it, that is how we can kind of shape our relationships into being so much more honest and what I think most of us are really looking for.
I think that's so important, especially, I mean, being a mom who works, you know,
Mhm.
if I have to spend all my time trying to navigate my adult friends' feelings
Mhm.
and figure out different ways to get out of things that I don't wanna do because I'm tired, it's not
Mhm.
a friendship, and it's certainly not the way I want to spend my mental energy. I
Yes, it's
I
so true.
value the friendships that I can say, "Hey, I haven't seen you in months, but we're still great."
Exactly. Yeah, I really do too. And some of my dearest, dearest friends are people where bidirectionally we have set boundaries with each other and said, my life is different now than it was when we met. And this works for me better now.
Mhm.
Right? How does that fit in your world? Okay, parts of it fit, parts of it don't, right? Let's negotiate and figure out what works. Those are the people I deeply love. And if I don't trust someone enough to do that, it doesn't mean that they can't be my friend, but I'm going to keep them at a little bit more of a distance because I can't fully be me.
Right.
Remember when we're securely attached, we want to be seen and known and loved for who we actually are and be allowed to be that person. And we want to be seen as competent. And if I can set a boundary with someone and they can hear it, that increases how competent I see them as
Mm.
tenfold. Like, "Oh, wow. I have so much respect for you that you could hear that because I know that's not always easy to hear."
No, absolutely, and it just I don't know about you, but I just feel more at ease with the person, you
Mhm.
know?
Yep.
Um, I'm not as guarded, and it just makes for better and meaningful conversation then in the end.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting and, coming back to the way that I think sometimes boundaries are overly reduced, it's not an attempt to keep people out.
No.
It's attempt to bring people in a way that feels right and feels safe. And it really is an act of love. Boundaries keep us all safe. And
Mhm,
parenting is a great example where if we have kids who don't have any boundaries set around them, that feels deeply unsafe for them. And we'll
mm,
see it as they grow up where, okay, maybe this super permissive parenting felt good, or, your friends envied you because you didn't have a lot of rules. But we need something to bounce off of. We need to know where the edges are. I feel much safer in adult relationships if I know what someone wants and expects and what feels right to them, and I can decide if I can meet them there on that given day or not.
mhm,
And it gives us a lot of real agency back in our lives to know these are the rules, right? These are the
mhm.
rules of engagement with this person. And they're telling me that because they trust that I can handle it.
Exactly. Somebody would not lay out a boundary with you if they didn't have faith that
Yeah.
you could do it, that you could respect it, that you're a person they can trust to be
Hmm.
able to say this to them. I always
Yeah.
tell people when somebody's trying to have a boundary with you, it's very respectful actually. It's somewhat of a compliment because
Hmm.
they're truly being vulnerable with you and trusting you with this
Yeah.
information. And they're
Exactly.
not
It
going to
really
do it with
is.
everybody.
They're not going to do it with everybody. I'm not
No,
going to take the time to set a detailed and clear boundary with someone that I don't trust. I'm just going to disengage from them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because why would I
Yeah.
put all my time and energy into someone who's not gonna fit in
Mhm.
my life anyways?
Right. Right. Exactly. So, there's a tricky category of people where, they might push back on boundaries. We're not super safe or trusting around them, but we don't want to completely disengage from them. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a client, right?
Uh-huh.
Where, what I just said is maybe not an option, or it's not an option that we want to choose. It could be that you have a parent who has, some abusive behavior history with you in the past, or
Mhm.
maybe there's someone in your life who is important to keep in your life. You don't want to just be done with them,
Uh-huh.
but you are setting boundaries around them to really protect yourself, to protect your nervous system, maybe protect your own children around them, that kind of thing. And that I think is probably the trickiest, and maybe what most of your listeners expected when they saw this title of, when people push
Uh-huh.
back on boundaries is like, yeah, what if those more toxic people push back, right? Um, which is, I think, worth a little bit of exploration, because it is kind of a different approach in my mind to what we do about that.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
What we were previously talking about was more boundaries with people that we wanted in our life. We wanted to increase
Mhm.
communication. Setting a boundary with someone that sometimes you're forced to have within your world.
Mhm. Yep.
And so, how do you have that boundary with someone who is difficult to have a boundary with and they're pushing back? But you do need a boundary to be in place to be safe.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that is a beautiful way of phrasing that question, right? So I still want to typically start with that what is my intention
Mhm.
component. What is my intention with this boundary? Even if it's just to right size and reaffirm exactly what you just said, that I do want this person or need to have this person in my life in some way, right? Sometimes that's worth looking at. Is that still really true?
Mhm.
If this person feels unsafe to the extent that I actually don't want them in my life, is this a point where I need to make that decision, or make that boundary so ironclad that I'm not going to be exposed to them or their behavior, right? So it's worth asking just to check it, because we can change our mind, we're allowed to. And if our intention is along the lines of, well, I have to interact with this person, or I do care about this person, I want some bit of them in my life, I'm willing to have some relationship with them,
Mhm.
then the intentionality is, okay, so what are you hoping will happen if you set this
Mhm.
boundary? Why are you going to give the gift of this boundary, which I agree with you really is a gift rather than just disappearing?
Absolutely.
What would be a good outcome is another way of thinking about that. If I set this boundary and it was a good outcome, what would have happened?
Mhm.
And that can sometimes help to shape what's the most important part of the boundary. We all would love for everyone to only speak kindly to us and to our children, and to be thoughtful and ask good questions, and all of those
Mhm.
things. And we may not be able to get all of those things with all of these people. So intentionally, right? What is it that I feel the most, importance around? Is it that I do not want to be spoken to in this way? Is it that I want to limit my time with this person and not have a lot of exposure to those dynamics? Is it that I want to interact with them only in a particular way? Right?
Mhm.
Maybe only over email, or only face to face, or only with someone else present in order to protect myself? Is it that I only want to interact with them about certain things, right? So we can get kind of granular about what is this boundary really about. It's
Mhm.
very hard to say, I don't want to be treated this way, right? A, that person might not know what we mean. B, if that's happening, we're probably in a position where we feel disempowered.
Mhm.
And so that's triply brave, right? Quadruply brave to try to set a boundary with someone where you have a real power differential. Still super important. But if we pull back for that question of, okay, what is my intention here, right? Maybe it's a supervisor or a boss
Mhm.
where we have to interact with them, and we want to set some sort of a boundary so that we are more protected. It might be, I'd like to have someone with me for our meetings, or I'd like to have an agenda ahead of time for our meetings so I can prepare, or, something that just makes
Mhm.
us feel a little bit more in our bodies so that we can be present. And if we get pushback at that point, right? If we get the
Mhm.
clarity that we're really looking for and we bravely say, here's what's happening. I'd like this to be different so that we can have a different relationship, right? The dear man format is a really good one for boundaries. This
Mhm.
is what's happening. Here's how I feel. Here's what I want, so that we both can get what we need here, right? Hey, boss, I know we have to meet. It's important. Every time we meet, I walk away feeling like I missed something. So I'd like to have someone there to take notes, or I'd like to have an agenda ahead of time so I don't miss anything and we can have more productive meetings. Right?
Mhm.
Just like an example. If we get pushback on that, that's when I want to really start to pay attention to, is this just more evidence that this relationship really isn't safe for me? Do I need to change my trust level with this person?
Mhm.
Is my comfort proving to not be very important to them? Because that is sometimes what people show us when we set a boundary. That word comfort has been flying around in my head lately because it's really, I know we talked about this Anne Lamott quote that no is a complete sentence.
Mhm.
Sometimes when we get pushback, well, why? The clearest answer is because I'm not comfortable.
Mhm.
And it's very hard to defend that someone should be comfortable,
Yes.
right?
Now, I have some children who have tried to do
Mhm,
that,
mhm.
but
Yep.
it is generally very difficult to
Mhm.
tell someone, "Well, you have to be comfortable. You should be
You have to
comfortable."
be comfortable. Right. Right. It's pretty invalidating, right? Your
Uh-huh.
feelings are wrong in this moment. Your discomfort is wrong. And I would like to be in relationship with people who actually care if I'm comfortable or not. And I would like to be in relationship with people who I actually care if they're comfortable or not. And comfort is a felt sense, right?
Mhm.
It is a body reaction, it's an emotional reaction. The example I gave to one of my clients recently was, I I have smaller feet than they do, and I said, "Well, my shoes are really comfortable, but you should just wear my shoes. They're so comfortable." Right? And I mean, it's silly, right? But, like,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you wear my shoes? Well, because they're not comfortable for me, right?
Mhm.
And I can't litigate that. I can't
No.
insist that my littler shoes are gonna be comfortable for you because you're telling me that they're not. So, having a phrase or two like that, like, "I'm just not comfortable with that," or "I'm not comfortable with that language," or "I'm not comfortable being touched in that way," or "I'm not comfortable spending that much time together," or "I'm not comfortable with you in my home," right?
Uh-huh.
These aren't easy things to say, and it's just a fact, right? It just really is a fact. So I think if we're getting pushback around that kind of boundary where it really is, as clear and kind as we can be and also very important for us, that's when I start to use it as information.
Uh,
Like, okay, wow, this is really not someone that I trust a whole lot. And do I want to reevaluate if I need to spend so much time with them? And if I do, how do I build in some protections around myself that don't require their agreement
mhm.
or their, coming alongside this boundary and agreeing that it's a good idea? We get to protect ourselves even if someone doesn't want to join us in that.
Absolutely.
And maybe it does mean that I recognize that I don't have a lot of trust in that moment, or I recognize that I want to take some time and breathe and do some yoga and get into my body before I interact with that person. So I have my own internal protections around. I debrief with someone I care about afterwards and I let that
Mhm.
be. So I think we can use people's reactions to our boundaries as really important information, right? Does this person care about me enough to have curiosity around this?
Mhm.
Maybe tell me their boundaries. Does this person maybe not care about me, or are they not able to show me that they care about me enough to resist the automatic pushback or the need to be, right in some way. Because boundaries are always right, so to speak,
Mhm.
for the person setting them, right? We don't have to agree that this is the perfect boundary. And if that feels like the debate that I'm in with somebody over and over again, I'm probably going to give a little bit more space in that relationship.
Mhm. No, and I think it's perfectly okay to give yourself the permission to recognize that you have tried, that you
Mhm,
have attempted to have conversations around
mhm,
boundaries. You have verbalized and been uncomfortable.
mhm,
And for whatever reason, the other person is not able or ready to hear that. That is
mhm.
perfectly fine for you to withdraw, to pull back, to not
Yep.
give them all your attention and energy. And that's
Mhm.
you're allowed to protect that.
You're allowed to. Yeah. And it may bring up a lot of feelings. Often those are the realizations that, help us recognize this person doesn't have the capacity to meet me where I need to be met, or I'm not as important to them as I thought I was, or they can't get out of their own way enough
Mhm.
to recognize that this is a loving and respectful gift that I'm giving them. And so sometimes that leads to a lot of grief. And that's what I see a lot in my practice, and I imagine you do too, is that real, depth of grief, like, oh, I don't get to have this kind of relationship with this person. Right? Maybe it's a parent and like, wow, I don't get to have a mom or a dad who shows up for me in this way. And oh, that's so sad. Right. And we can kind of limp along thinking that maybe someone has capacity they don't, if we are adjusting and taking all the consequences for those relationships. And when we stop doing that, sometimes that is maybe the thing that we've been avoiding this whole time, is seeing so accurately that they can't be that person for us.
I call it sometimes with my clients, the grief of maybe, grieving
Yeah.
that the maybe this or that, and recognizing we have to let go of the maybe because the maybe is not
Mhm.
going to happen. And it just causes you such stress to constantly
Yeah.
putting yourself into a pretzel.
Mhm. It does. It does. And paradoxically, sometimes when we get that realization, when we allow ourselves to do what we need to do in response to our own boundaries, every once in a while that does help that person get it
Mhm.
and see it. We can't bank on it. We can't do it for that reason, right? Well, maybe if I just stop seeing this person, they'll finally, be the person that I want them to be. That doesn't typically work. But what I do see a lot, and particularly if I'm working in the field of addiction or if I'm working with relationship dynamics, is when people start honoring their own boundaries. And really, by honoring, I mean behaving in accordance with their boundaries. Because we can talk a lot about boundaries, but what really matters is what we do with our behavior,
Yeah,
with our
the
body,
actions.
the actions, right? Are we backing them up? If I'm saying, "Well, I'm not gonna do this," but I keep doing it, it's not really a boundary, right? But when we do the thing that we need to do to protect ourselves, when we don't show up at the thing that we said we were not gonna show up at if that person was there, for example, or, if we follow through and say, we talked about this, I cannot be around you when you're high, and you're high right now, so I'm gonna go, right?
Mhm.
When we start really doing those things, sometimes that's a consequence for that person that is important enough for them to recognizing that they need to change their behaviors or talk to a therapist or read a book
Mhm.
or something to be able to be that person to meet us there. So we don't it's kind of this double-edged sword where we can't set boundaries to make someone change, right? That's manipulative, it doesn't work very well, and it's probably not hearted if it does work on their part. And I have very rarely seen people make really significant, important changes when someone didn't set a boundary with them,
Mhm.
right? Like when there wasn't some sort of a big consequence. And the field of addiction is a great example of that, where We don't know what someone's quote unquote bottom is. And the consequence that might mean a lot for me might be one of 1,000 of those same consequences for somebody else, but it might not be. And so oftentimes when I see people who've come to see me in early recovery, it is because of a consequence that they
Mm.
had, right? Maybe a legal consequence, maybe a relationship consequence, sometimes consequences that took so long for that other person to really be willing to set and enact for them. And that was the thing that made them willing to change. So we can't go at that as the hope, right? I'm going to set
Mhm.
this boundary and this is going to be an entirely different person. But if we set the boundary and we mean it and we hold it and that helps someone recognize that this isn't working anymore, I will take it. Right. And
Oh,
that often is change
absolutely.
that lasts. Mhm.
Absolutely. This has been such a great conversation again. Thank you.
My pleasure, Erin. Yeah, it's great to talk with you and always happy to talk about these really important topics.
Oh, I appreciate it. Before we go, I'm going to ask you my last question. What is something you would tell your younger self about boundaries if you could?
Mm, great question. I wish I could tell my younger self loving,
Oh,
that boundaries are loving, and that receiving boundaries is loving, that setting boundaries is loving, right? It's not cruel.
mm,
I think, often when we grow up with more of that, well-intended and yet make suring dynamic, it can feel like a boundary is a criticism, or it can feel like a boundary is going to hurt someone. Whereas actually it's our way of saying this is good, this isn't good, I like this, I don't like that. As we talked about last time, I love it when my children set boundaries with me.
mm,
Eventually, right? Maybe in that
yeah.
moment it's a little like, "What? You don't wanna do that thing?" But if I really take a minute, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, thank you." Right?
Mhm,
Thank you for trusting me with that. Thank you for loving me enough to tell me what really matters to you.
mhm.
So I wish I could go and tell every child that boundaries are loving.
Oh, I love that. Somebody out there really needs to hear that. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thanks for creating a space for these kinds of conversations.
Oh, well, I love it. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you for joining us on this insightful journey into the world of boundaries. We hope today's conversation with Dr. Jen has inspired you to embrace in boundaries as acts of love and self care. Remember, you have the right to change your boundaries and change the dynamics of your relationship. Stay curious, communicate openly, and continue to grow. Before you go, though, let's take a brief moment, a pause. Let's notice your breath, your feet on the floor, the surface supporting you. Nothing to change, just letting your nervous system register that this moment is safe enough. If this episode helped you feel even a little more steady, that matters. Small moments of regulation support resilience over time. Thank you again for listening to Notes to My Nervous System. If this resonated with you, please hit subscribe, leave a review. That helps others to find this work. And if you want more gentle micro resets, check out my app, Mind Circuit. It's called Ease. You can find it in Apple Store, Google Play. It provides short, evidence based practices to help support your nervous system when life is just too loud. Thanks for being here. And as always, be kind to your own wiring.